Hello, this is Eric von Schweber, Executive Co-Chair of SURVEYOR Health. I'm going to show you our medication risk maps integrated within the SMART Apps container using the SMART Apps API. To begin with, I'll select a patient, Elizabeth Jones. I'll then invoke medication risk maps for that patient. Medication risk maps is the next major step beyond drug-drug interaction checkers. What we do is take the evidence and make it actionable towards identifying and managing the risks of adverse events as well as the trade-offs of those risks. Now, what we're showing here is we've brought that patient's meds, Elizabeth Jones' meds, over. In actual production deployments, we also bring problem lists over, and where they're so coded, presenting symptoms and chief complaints. In this case, we see the main medication risk maps widget for the patient. Over to the right of it is context-sensitive help. So if you're doing something in the widget, you can get questions answered for how to do things, specifically in the widget. Now, let's take a look at this risk landscape. For a patient like Elizabeth Jones on these 5 meds, we see that there is a risk of 140 side effects, of which 76 have major severity. Additionally, we see that she's at risk for 1 moderate interaction. Now, had we also brought the problem list over, you would also see an additional accordion that opens and closes for contraindications, both drug disease contraindications as well as drug patient demographics. Here, though, note the ratio between the number of side effect risks and the number of interaction risks. Drug-drug interaction checkers only look at the interactions. And because there are so many more side effects risks due to individual drug side effects as well as combinatorial effects and additive toxicities, because of this ratio, we now see why the problem of adverse drug events, the 4,000 deaths a week in this country, as well as the $359 billion impact on the healthcare system, why that's not being addressed with drug interaction checkers that are in widespread use. But let's take this risk landscape and let's personalize it to that patient's presenting symptoms and chief complaints. Since we've not automatically brought them over as part of the integration, I'm going to enter them in the search box and search the risk landscape on these. We immediately see that that 1 moderate interaction has 0 hits with related to this search string, which includes the patient's presenting symptoms of tachycardia and in a confused state, as well as her prior problems with anemia and lung and pulmonary issues. So that interaction is not related to these clinical findings. However, 9 of those 140 side effect risks are related. They are correlated, 7 of those being major. I'm going to go ahead and click on the side effects risk map accordion and open it up. We're now presented with a heat map, where each row is a side effect associated with 1 or more of the patient's meds. The meds are represented as columns. You'll notice the names are abbreviated so they fit nicely on iPads and iPhones and mobile devices. And where a med column intersects a side effect row, at that cell we see a level of risk. So let's look at this example. For example, here we have levothyroxine. And it has a 0 to 1% risk of causing major tachycardia all by itself, without interactions, without additive effects. Now, if you look at the column labeled all, we're using probabilistic artificial intelligence to determine the net risk from all of those additive toxicities, which these drugs present 2 at a time, 3 at a time, 4 at a time, N at a time. We look at all possible combinations. The result, though, is we see that the risk of this patient experiencing major confusion based on their full regimen is a whopping 10 to 25%. If we also look at her risk of her major tachycardia, we see that similarly, a whopping 10 to 25%. And that's coming from all the combinatorial effects of her meds, not just what drug interaction checkers do pairwise 2 at a time. So now we have good reason to consider that her meds are causing her problems and should be investigated before spending tens of thousands of dollars on other kinds of diagnostics. Next, the heat map visual information shows you exactly which are the highest risk suspects as well as the secondary. Clearly, this medication at the extreme right, which is her phenergan codeine oral, is posing the highest risk to both her presenting symptoms as well as some of the problems she's had in the past. Some of her other meds have a secondary risk factor. So what have we done so far? First, we've identified that there's a high likelihood that the patient's presenting symptoms are coming from her meds as additive toxicities. Second, we performed a diagnostic function using information visualization to spot the likely suspects and contributors. But at Surveyor Health, we don't want to just do a better job flagging problems and generating alerts. We want to help the clinician to resolve those problems. So by putting our cursor over the highest suspect here, let's go ahead and choose from the pop-up context menu, simulate the impact of an alternate medication. So we're going to now try simulating a change of therapy. How should we choose that therapy? I'm going to choose other drugs that are in the same therapeutic drug class as the patient's existing phenergan codeine. I'm doing that so that we're choosing a drug that is similarly efficacious. We don't want to trade off efficacy for reduced side effect risk. Now, we could reduce the scope of this huge list by selecting generic medications or top 200 for availability, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to select all of them and show them side by side with the patient's current med with respect to the patient's current presenting problems as well as her prior problems. So we see here the first med in the first column is the patient's current drug, and we see even to the immediate right of it, there is a med that is of lower risk on the patient's problems. So for example, here we have Abinil. Abinil is lower on multiple of these effects: major confusion, major tachycardia. So I'm going to go ahead and select it as an alternate medication and confirm the replacement. We're now recomputing the risks, and let's see what impact we've had. First, we see that major confusion is much farther down the list. This is by default sorted according to combined risk in descending order. Now, that risk is now 1 to 5%, where before it was 10 to 25%. How about the risk of major tachycardia? We've now reduced that down to 5 to 10%, where before it was 10 to 25%. So we've achieved a great reduction in risk of the patient's presenting symptoms. We've also had another useful consequence here. If we see here, there are now no more interactions, 0 interactions. When we looked at that before, the patient actually had 1 interaction. So in one fell swoop, we've reduced her additive toxicities that may be contributing to her presenting symptoms, and we've eliminated a drug-drug interaction. So all told, medication risk maps, especially when integrated into an EMR or other health IT through something like the SMART API, can provide right at the point of care, right within the clinical workflow, screening for symptoms based on side effects, interactions, contraindications, and all of those risks. It helps identify and diagnose the causes of those risks and helps to resolve those risks, all in a matter of moments. So while I've taken a good bit of time explaining this to you, what I just demoed for you takes a clinician on order of about 10 seconds to spot the problems and the likely causes, and takes them about a minute to consider alternates. So about a minute to a minute and a half altogether. Very little impact on the workflow, huge impact on improving quality, improving patient care and health, and reducing the cost impact. I'll give you a few more tidbits here. It's also possible to see everything if one wants to, so one can uncheck search results. One can also go in and say, I'm concerned for this patient going forward. of tachycardia. I want to always be tracking that. I'm also concerned about, in the future, about, let's say, their anemia. I'm concerned with their confusion. I want these concerns to go in the record so that when anyone looks at their record, these will be brought to the surface. In fact, we can even do that here. We can click on Tracked Concerns, and we'll deselect Search Results so that now we're very focused on specifically the patient's problems. We can also, you'll notice that these information icons, these provide access to the full-text drug information monograph. And where they're circled in red, it means that our full-text search has identified that some of the patient's existing and prior problems are discussed in greater length within that monograph. So, for example, if I pull up this monograph right here, we can now see these particular risks. So we've focused on lung, side effects, contraindications. So you can see that the maps also serve as an entry point to the huge volume of full-text qualitative data, using structured data to get to qualitative textual data. And we can also do other things. We might say, you know, maybe this person doesn't need their antibiotic. So, for example, we can simply say, let's try removing it by deselecting the map-it and recomputing it. And now we get further reductions in the risk landscape and envelope. Please go to Surveyor Health at www.surveyorhealth.com to learn more about this, to use it yourself. There are plenty of examples. In fact, we have some of the top celebrity deaths like Michael Jackson and Heath Ledger and Anna Nicole. We have other patient profiles that you can experiment with, and you can create your own free account and try it out for yourself and your family. So again, this is Eric von Schweber at Surveyor Health. Thank you very much, and we very much appreciate this opportunity and love the SMART API based on RDF and current technology. A great leap forward. Thank you very much.